Happy summer, everyone. Welcome back to episode 9 of The Dark Room, where two blind cinephiles illuminate the sighted. I'm Lee Pugsley.
I'm Alex Howard.
And we are your two legally blind hosts of this podcast for film lovers of all abilities.
We're doing a little bit of a departure of our normal episodes. We had the opportunity to be guest speakers at a class at DePaul University. Our friend Matt Lauterbach is teaching a class on film accessibility, and he invited us to be guest speakers for the audio description portion.
Me and Alex had a really good time interacting with the students, and we thought the conversation was very enlightening and insightful. And it was just great to kind of share our perspective and to hear what other students have learned about audio description. And because we thought this conversation was a productive one, we wanted to share it with you guys, the listeners, and hope that you might glean something from it as well. First of all, we just think it's awesome that you guys have an interest in accessibility in film. Me and Alex feel like it's very important. So before we dive into things further, we'll just go ahead and give a brief introduction on ourselves and a little bit of our background, just kind of what made us interested in accessibility in cinema, specifically with audio description. And Alex, I'll pass it to you first to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about maybe your background, your vision, and just the way that you interact with media and a little bit of your journey with that.
Yeah, I've always loved the stories that movies tell. And so I think as I graduated college, my eyesight kind of got worse. And my eyesight became my primary disability, whereas before it was my fine motor skills. I think around 2018 or 2019, I knew about audio description, but that's when I really started using it. Even though I worked at a movie theater, I wasn't really using it. I felt like, it was kind of in the denial, like I didn't really need it. And then I can't even remember what kind of triggered it. On the episode we released today, I had my old roommate on that I was living with when I really started using it. And he thinks it was Mandalorian when that came out. I think I really started realizing how great audio description was and started using it more then. And now I really can't watch anything without it.
Nice. I'll give a brief introduction of myself. My name is Lee. I was born with the eye condition glaucoma, and over time, my vision has decreased. So when I was younger, I had vision in both eyes and pretty decent vision, but during college, I lost the vision in my right eye. Right after I graduated college, I lost the vision lost a little bit more of the vision in my left eye. So I only have a percentage of vision in my left eye, not full percent at all. And I graduated from college with a degree in theater. So I'm a director, writer, and actor here in Los Angeles. I dabble in both the theater world as well as the film and TV world. And, when projects come my way, I'll take them. So in terms of audio description, I have a very similar journey to Alex, where up until about 2018, I never used audio description, even though it would have been very helpful earlier on in my journey with taking in movies and absorbing the fullness of what they have to offer. But I always thought it would be annoying to have a little voice in your ear telling you what's going on, when I'd rather just take in the environment of the movie without being interrupted. And then once I transitioned over, I realized how helpful it was. I realized how much of a movie or TV show I was missing without having the audio description there. And since then, I've never gone back. So yeah, that's a little bit of background on me. And to start off with, me and Alex feel that, the best kind of learning is interactive, and it happens through dialogue and conversation. So instead of, me and Alex just sitting here for an hour and you guys listening to us talk, we wanted to open up the floor to you guys, first of all, to ask questions about audio description or accessibility in cinema and the current state of it. Whatever questions you may have, there's no question that's off limits. And feel free to ask away. And then we'll take some questions for a little bit and see what we can learn and discover together through that. And then we'll move on to a few other things that we have planned for the day. So I know Matt had sent me and Alex some questions that you guys had given us already. We can refer to those, but also if you had sent Matt a question, feel free to ask it again here.
I can get started. This is Izzy. I think I emailed this question to the two of you, but it was about the storytelling aspect of movies, which is, why we go to the movies, is to be told a story and to be brought into the narrative. So for the two of you, how do you think that audio description can best support that narrative, especially in genres like horror films or movie musicals that rely very heavily on visuals or might have quite a lot of musical numbers and songs that would compete with space for the audio description?
So you're asking how the audio description helps understand the story, right? In horror and music, or just like how it describes things that are very visual?
Well, kind of both. So if we were working on a team that was writing an audio description track, how can we best align the experience of watching with AD and watching without AD so that, the scares happen at the same time, or you can still enjoy the music, but get a description of, a dance number or something like that.
Yeah, so I think for horror, it's a little hard. I'll speak to horror and I'll at least speak to the musicals. But for horror, it's a little harder because I know sometimes there's a scream or there's, something, somebody yells something, you always want to leave the dialogue so we can hear it. And so it's a little difficult to describe things. But I think if you can do it right on, I think we're going to show a clip from The Invisible Man in a few minutes where it literally is right on the jump scare. But I know that's kind of rare. So I think for me, at least, I like it just afterwards rather than just before, if possible, so that, it doesn't necessarily spoil it if I'm watching with other people. Because I think it makes me self-conscious personally if I'm watching with people that usually aren't or are sighted and the scare is ruined. I almost feel bad that their experience is being compromised from mine. But I also think for something like, I don't know if you guys listen, I just watched Skinamarink this last couple weeks, which is an experimental horror movie. And there's almost no dialogue in the whole movie. And it's shot like very grainy. So it's supposed to be like a kid walking around a house and the doors disappear in the house. So you're not really supposed to know what you're looking at. And so it was frustrating for me because I was like, okay, I don't know. I doubt my vision regularly. So, this is supposed to make people not know. But I'm like, I really don't know if this is my eyesight or if it's the movie. And so the audio description was really vital in that, in telling me what was on screen. So yeah, I think as long as you just do the most important things, if there's something that is a little extra and you have time, go for it. But you also want to let the movie breathe a little bit. So you don't want wall-to-wall audio description and dialogue. You need some time to silence builds tension too. So you need some silence. I think A Quiet Place is another good one to turn to, where there is room for description, but they don't use it all because the movie is supposed to be quiet a lot of the time. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll follow up with that too, and to touch on some of the things that Alex was talking about. It can be tricky, and some of you guys may encounter this as you're writing your own audio description scripts. It can be tricky sometimes to know if you should describe some piece of action, whether it's a jump scare or a moment of action where it's like someone gets shot, like, do you describe it before it happens or after it happens? And I think that you have to look at the questions I think that are really good to ask is like, what's going to provide the maximum effect for the viewer? Meaning, if we were to describe a jump scare before it happens, that may not be as effective as letting the viewer feel the tension, having that scare happen. And then even though, we may not know what that is in that exact second, right after you describe what just happened, or, a guy getting shot, sometimes it can be described before, sometimes it's described after. And that's probably more like, either way is probably okay in that scenario, or like either way works. It also just depends too on how much dialogue or how much action is after the jump scare or the piece of action, the piece of action to decide, do I have time to describe more after, or is there a lot of stuff happening that I just have to move on? So it's best to describe this moment before it happens rather than after it happens. And that's one of those things that I'm sure is a challenge in trying to figure out how to craft a good audio description script. But yeah, Izzy, in answer to comment on your question about the musical genre, that one is really interesting because so much of the musical, obviously a musical is about the visuals, and but it's also about the music too. So when you're describing visuals in a musical genre, that's a little more tricky because you have to find that balance between how do we let the score play maybe during a dance break or during some of the instrumental moments that are happening. So it's not just audio description all the time, but still letting the audience, the viewer, know what's exactly happening. And I do have a clip from a musical later that I'll show a good example of how I think that's done. But sometimes, they'll just say, people dance, and, that doesn't really tell me much specifically about like, what are they doing? Are they like, moving their arms up and down? Are they spreading them out? Are they doing like kicks? Are they doing jumps? So for a musical, especially with choreography, the more that you can describe specifically what the range of motion is that the dancers or characters are doing during a dance number, the more it helps me feel like I get a full experience of watching a musical movie. But then it is also the challenge that comes with musical movies sometimes, especially a fully sung through movie musical like Les Miserables, for example, from 2012 with Hugh Jackman, is like that movie's entirely sung. So sometimes they'll just have a very quick snippet in there because there's not a lot of instrumental break. So they'll be like, Valjean crosses the street, and it's just like super quick. They have like 2 seconds to say something, and that's a really interesting movie to watch in terms of musical movie audio description because there's not big dance breaks and there's not a lot of extra space to throw in audio description. So they have to be very strategic in how they wrote that script. And I'm sure it took them a little bit of time to, perfect it to a place where it wouldn't, where you'd find that balance. A lot of it with audio description is like a balancing act, as pointing back to what Alex was saying.
So Lee, out of curiosity, do they say, during the famous Anne Hathaway song, do they say she's crying, or do they leave that because you can hear it in her voice? Do you know?
I don't remember completely. I think, they say something, I think they say like, they'll say like, like tears run down her cheek, but it's like super fast,
Yeah.
Yeah, so they do mention that now that I'm thinking about it, but it's very quick.
And then I know for Lee was mentioning it too. It might be a little because Lee and I are into these genres more, than the average moviegoer. But I know Lee was saying he wants the choreography described a lot more. And I think for me, I want the gore, the like really like tell me what's happening, like I can't experience the gore like most people can, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's a great kill, and I'm like, I want to know like how did it happen. And I know it's like kind of a sick thing to want as like a horror fan, but it's like, no, like tell me. And I think Lee is kind of in the same boat with like choreography. Like I think the average moviegoer might be fine with, you know, maybe a little bit more than they're dancing. But I think Lee, you want a little bit more detail. Like really as a musical and play director, you want to know what the choreography is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And taking these principles to and the things we're talking about beyond just the horror or musical genre as well, just the more specific that an audio describer or an audio description script can be for any genre, the more that the blind or low vision viewer is going to feel that they have that they are able to take in the movie fully and they're not missing, they're not behind the curve they're not behind the curve of other viewers.
Yeah, the more vivid of a picture you can paint, the better. But it's like you want to do it in as few words as possible.
And just to for some background or our experience with audio description, I guess correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I don't believe me and Alex I've never written an audio description script, and have you written one, Alex?
No, we are purely consumers. I guess we've been watching it consistently for what, 5 years for me?
Yeah, it's about the same for me as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're throwing out these principles and, ideas and concepts that we know work for us to make cinema more accessible, but we have not gone through this process ourselves. So I acknowledge that there is, it's easy to just say, oh, do this right, do it this way, do it that way. But I'm sure it's different when, you're actually the one writing the audio description script as well.
I did do quality control one time for a project, and I can admit I did not do a good job because I was trying to describe everything. And so I felt like I needed to give them notes. Basically, quality control is they'll send you, usually it's the script, and you have to read the script while the content's playing. But since I couldn't read the script, they had the audio description pretty much done with the voiceover, but they sent me the file for notes. And so I was giving them pages of notes saying what they missed, but I wasn't taking into account, oh, we need space to let it breathe. And so they didn't hit me up again after because I, didn't take that into account. But looking back now, I'm like, man, I really, needed to give it room to breathe to make sense.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question.
Yeah, and Lee and Alex, I thought it might be a good time to, since you just talked about the horror and musical genres, would now be a good time to share those clips?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I can cue them up and you just tell me whose clip you want to start with.
Yeah, let's start. Alex, are you cool starting with Invisible Man?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go.
She picks up the light again and shines its beam around the dusty space. Several paint cans sit beside her. She turns and looks behind her. Grabbing the phone, she makes a call. The screen on a cell phone at the other end of the attic starts to glow. Cecilia shines her light on it and hangs up. Holding the flashlight in one hand, she crawls toward the cell phone on the floor. The pale blonde picks it up from beside a set of keys. Tapping the screen, she brings up a photo of herself lying asleep in Sydney's bed. She swipes through more pictures of her and Sydney slumbering, and her brow furrows. Setting aside the phone, she finds a baggie containing the large chef's knife that moved off the counter when the bacon and eggs burned. She takes the blade from the bag and regards it with a puzzled expression. A portfolio catches her eye, and Cecilia flips through her missing architectural designs. A creeping view approaches her from behind. With a distressed expression, she glances around. The cell phone shows a text in all caps from an unknown number. Surprise! Startling, Cecilia turns and shines her flashlight across the room. She picks up the chef's knife. The pale blonde keeps the blade in one hand and the flashlight and cordless phone in the other as she crawls forward. She inches toward the open hatch in the floor. Reaching the opening, she sets the flashlight and phone aside. Gripping the edges of the hatch, Cecilia slowly leans forward and peers down toward the hallway below. A view from the bottom of the ladder shows her pale face framed by the opening. She dumps a can of white paint down through it. The paint spreads over an invisible human-shaped figure standing at the top of the ladder, and she recoils. Cowering on the floor of the dark attic, Cecilia gradually moves forward. She looks down through the hatch once more and finds the paint-covered invisible man gone and the ladder knocked over.
Yeah, so you can see that they let it go, like the sound go up when the scare happened, and then they'll tell you what it was. But a lot of the things they were saying was happening either as it was happening or just after. I think the only thing that happened before was the picture on the phone.
I'm curious to know from anyone in class too, like after watching this clip, what observations you guys picked up on how the audio description enhances the viewing experience for this clip, or if you guys have any other just observations about the clip in general.
This is Connor. I thought it was interesting how they described a certain camera move. That they described it like the view creeps up behind her, and I thought that was a really effective way of describing just the movement of the camera and how it related to what was happening in the scene.
Yeah, and it also gave me, like, as a visually impaired viewer, it almost gave me like oh, is there someone behind her?
And even to your point, Connor, too, like the choice of language they use, like the view creeps up. They could have said the view moves up. But because it's like, a horror film, I think using the word creeps up instead of like moves up or pans up, that just even adds to the viewer's experience of, hey, we're in a horror film. So really good. Yeah, really good observation.
I've never watched this movie, but I find it actually helpful even for me with full vision. Yeah, I like to talk about the cell phone is at the end of a tunnel, and then also when she spilled the white paint. I wouldn't know there was a human figure, without audio description actually. So I thought this clip is very helpful for me to learn how to write audio description more creatively. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I completely agree with that too. Yeah, I remember seeing it in theaters and I was like, yeah, I would have never known it was a human figure either if it didn't, because I think that's the first time if I remember right, that's the first time that we see the invisible man, like not invisible, obviously. And so I think that was a big moment in the movie.
This is Adriana. I just wanted to comment that I think I find it interesting that they were switching names because it was like for given what was needed. But the choice to use the pale blonde is interesting to me because like is she pale because like her fear, like is she scared, or is it pale blonde as in light blonde colored hair? So that's like an interesting phrasing to be using when it comes to describing a human person.
Yeah, I think not to speak for the writers, but I think they, if they keep using the same description, it would get repetitive. So I think they have to come up with different things. But then also I've noticed in description, even sometimes in movies, it might be a twist revealed later what their name is. So sometimes they won't, well, actually a lot of the time they won't describe the person by their name until it's revealed in the actual movie. So they'll keep saying the blonde, the father, the father, the father. And then once they say the name, then they'll, say what it is from then on in the movie.
I actually have this is Izzy again. I have a question about that because I was watching The Diplomat on Netflix with audio description because it was moving really fast and I really needed the audio description to help me remember what was going on because I couldn't follow it. But one thing I watched, probably 4 or 5 episodes until they named some of the secondary characters because they just happened to not be called by name until then. But it wasn't like a horror film or something where that information would have been a spoiler or revealed anything. Like they could have called, I forget their names now because I'm terrible at remembering names, but like they could have called Bob, but he was just Bob. They just kept calling him, like the guy with brown hair, and not even, the assistant to the director or something that would have helped me remember like why Bob was in those scenes. So I was wondering how you two feel about especially series that just because of time, they might not name somebody until episode 4 or 5 in a season, but they choose not to name them in the audio description because they haven't been named in the dialogue, even if it's not, story-wise important to withhold that name.
I'm not sure, like, I feel like, and I don't want to speak for the people who wrote it, but I know with series, maybe sometimes they don't show them the full series right off the bat. Was this a Netflix original or was it
I
like
think,
a network show?
yeah.
It's on Netflix. Yeah, it is.
Okay. So I'm assuming they had all of them done at that point. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why they waited, but I know with AD, a lot of times it does help me to have, I'm really bad at remembering names too, like Little Women or Women Talking or something like that. The Woman King, like where it's a big cast, Oceans, like the character names are really important and they're, doing a lot of things. And, Bob looks like Joe and they're doing very, very different things. And so the character names really help. And I feel like, for me personally, imagining calling him the man with brown hair and then all of a sudden calling him Bob, it would kind of throw me off. What do you think, Lee?
This is total speculation, but first to cut to the chase first, and then I'll backtrack. I would prefer that as soon as they're able to introduce a character by name, that the audio description script would do that rather than waiting for however long. In movies, it's a little easier, like Alex was saying, because as soon as the character's name is mentioned on screen, then they'll start referring to them by their name. But in TV shows, sometimes I wonder if they do it, if they wait, because it's like they don't want to take focus away from the main character storylines. And so they're like, okay, let's just call these characters by name so that the viewer is able to follow the primary character storylines. And then because the secondary characters are the secondary characters, they're not as crucial. So we can wait to introduce them by name until a few episodes in. That being said, is that my preferred way of doing it? No, I would much rather prefer that they called them by name earlier on, because once you have the name, it's a lot easier to follow these characters' journeys. And like Alex was saying, to kind of separate out like who the characters are, especially, if there are a lot of characters. So very good question. And that's, I guess, how I feel about it as well.
And then we even can get into like Back to the Future and things. I think I haven't watched Back to the Future with audio description, but I would imagine they do like future Marty, past Marty, like you can have different versions of characters too.
If there are no more questions, then Matt, we can move on to the Mary Poppins Returns clip. For the clip we're about to watch, this is from Mary Poppins Returns, and it is basically during a dance break of one of the or more so during a dance break of one of the musical numbers. So I think this is a great example of audio description in a musical. So we'll watch it and then we can dissect it from there.
And Lee, is this a musical that you knew before, or is this an original musical for the?
That's a great question. So this movie came out in 2019 and it was the sequel to Mary Poppins. So I had no prior knowledge of this musical, but that's a great question because oftentimes when there's musical movie adaptations, I'm a theater nerd as well. So I'm a movie buff and a theater nerd. So I usually have been like, oh, I like have the soundtrack memorized. I've seen the show live a bunch. So the audio description, or like, if I'm missing out on things, I'll just fill them in within like what's in my like memory bank and what I know about a show. So when there is a movie musical that I don't know anything about, that's definitely a lot different, and audio description becomes that much more imperative to my enjoyment.
Great. All right. Shall I play it?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, here we go.
He pushes aside clumps of dangling roots, and up ahead of him sees Learys, like himself, hanging onto street lamps, lighting them one by one. They adopt poses, extend their back legs, tip their caps, and watched by the bank's children, perform a vigorous dance routine halfway up the lampposts, swinging around and kicking up their legs. Mary and the children find a seat to watch the performance. The Learys high kick, jump to the ground, spin their raised arms, grip the lampposts with one hand, stretching their bodies outwards. Then holding on with both hands, one above the other, they extend their legs sideways in a scissor action and salute. Jack joins in with the men, all of them like him, wearing wool jackets and trousers with a variety of shirts, scarves and tank tops. Some wear flat caps, others peaked caps, as they salute and pump their arms and legs. Some swing down from a wrought iron railing to where Jack and the other Learys are swinging on lampposts. 3 perform several flips in a row, winning applause from Mary Poppins. Others dive into an athletic forward roll. Jack and others perching on the lamppost bases kick out in front of them, sit, stand and perch again, pump their arms across their chests and jump up. Others grab their ladders and balance on the lower rungs as if they were on stilts. They dance around the ladders, climb all the way up them and let them sink to the ground, as others leap onto lampposts. A couple of men do backflips, and Jack and the others dance and swing around the lampposts, doffing their caps as they swing. One cheery fellow with a striped top grins at the children.
Come along, join us in a bit of kick and France.
That's really interesting. I've actually never seen that movie.
I personally recommend it. Once again, I'm curious to know from any of you guys in class, what any observations you had about the audio description in this clip.
Hi, it's Julia speaking, Julia Huang. And well, first of all, I think it's so great. And I noticed 2 things. One is that they particularly pick someone with British accents and kind of to feeling the cultural background of this film. And the second is, I guess, the description. The script writer is really good at choreography. I mean, describing each and every dance, gesture and the movement, and precisely and quite briefly. It could sync with the time. And there's one part I noticed a little, but since we're only watching a clip, I haven't watched the movie yet. I just, there's somewhere that describes someone in red, someone in what caps. That's when I was doing the audio description, writing the script, I was wondering, this is also my question, I was wondering how much detail you wanted to go into about sort of kind of a background, the visual effect, like such as, like the part we watched, they didn't talk about the historical background. This is definitely not modern, right? And this is not in, say, not like the setting in The Invisible Man. And how much detail you go into about what they wear to help the audience understand, what kind of a setting and styles of the visual effects. Thank you.
That's a fantastic question. And what I would say to that, and Alex, I'll let you comment on this as well, is so I believe, and I can't remember for sure, but oftentimes in movies, at the beginning of the movie, they'll be like, in 19th century London, or in, 20th century France, or there, or sometimes, in a period piece, there will be a year on it or something, a year on it as well. That being said, they don't always tell you like what, where it's supposed to take place. Sometimes I guess you just have to pick up on like context clues and like the time of it and everything. But I do think that when there's an appropriate time for it, if you are able to detail some of the costuming, even the colors as well as the styles, that is very helpful. Like in this one, they talk about like, in this clip, it's like flat caps and other, hats. The way that they're describing the clothing, even in this clip, it makes me realize, okay, we're probably not going to be in present day America where you're just walking down the streets of New York because of the description of the clothing. So anytime you're able to fill in more details that way, or if you're in like a period piece like Shakespeare in Love, let's say, I've never watched that movie without a description, if you're able to be like, she walks along in her corset, her gown flows to the ground, that would tell me, okay, like this is probably a period piece as well, because the way that they describe the gown or the way that they describe what she's wearing cues me into the time period to some degree. But yeah, colors and specifics of clothing can be very helpful. But also there's that balance, because I don't think it's necessary to like describe every little bit of clothing on every single person, because you just practically don't have time for that. But the more specificity, the better as far as I'm concerned. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Once again, this is purely from a consumer standpoint, speculating. But I think the reason they described it is because the clothing, the red, the hats, and like it all played into the dance number and the visuals of what was going on with the dance number. And I don't think necessarily if it's something like the Invisible Man or Quiet Place or something like, more modern, yes, it would be helpful to know what they're wearing, but it's not necessary. So I think if it doesn't have an impact on the visual experience for the audience, then I think if they don't need to, they usually just let it breathe. Because I think it is like, while knowing is always better, if it's going to mean wall-to-wall description, I'd rather have some room to breathe than not. Would you agree, Lee?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I guess to like kind of sum up what Alex was saying, that probably I should have just been more succinct to begin with, is if the color or the costume is something that helps enhance the world and if you see that there was a purposeful reason for them to use these colors or these costumes, then it's probably worth describing. Like, once again, going back to what Alex was saying, in this movie, since it is a musical and musicals are bright, flashy, and colorful, and with, these costumes with like the lamplighters and stuff, it does help create a more vivid picture of just kind of like the panache of the visual spectacle of what's happening. But, once again, it may not always be necessary. You are right, Alex, about that.
Especially for me, like I just recently started using a white cane. I'm legally blind in one eye, I guess legally blind, like all together. But that clip specifically was very gray. And so when they said red, I that was helpful for me because I couldn't tell that was red. So, I mean, I did appreciate the color description in that one. For Lee, I think the reason I brought up, have you seen this musical before, like you watched the movie? I think if I were you going in for a musical I've seen, I would have an expectation of what would be described and how it would come out. And so, like, for you going in, if it's a musical, are you thinking like, oh, they didn't describe that, or like there are things that are missing? And then for a musical that's fresh that you know nothing about, are you a little easier on critiquing the description since you don't know it as well?
Yeah, when I'm if it's a musical that I don't know, I'm definitely easier on taking it in and critiquing because I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to know. So whatever they want to give me, I'll take it in as new information. If it's a musical movie that I know, then I will go into it thinking, I'll go into it and have expectations of, okay, they should describe this. And yeah, you're right on both of those. And then one other point about, just like color and costumes and other things used purposefully. I don't know if these movies are described. I've not watched them with audio description, but any movie by Baz Luhrmann, or I would say, yeah, any movie by Baz Luhrmann, Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, Elvis, all of those, Baz Luhrmann uses color and he uses costumes oftentimes in a very symbolic way. Colors represent something that's purposeful to his narrative. And I don't know if those movies, well, I know Elvis is described, but it would be worth watching part of a Baz Luhrmann film to see how they describe things, because everything about the style says something about his directorial vision. And that does help paint a full picture. And then one other comment I wanted to make really quick is with the audio describer's voice about them being a British audio describer, there is something to consider as well when when people describe, they always try to pick people that are fitting of the type of movie that it is. So for example, like Harry Potter, I know has British audio describers, and but if you're doing like, let's say Barbie, you're probably not going to have a gruff guy be like, Barbie walks across the street, she gets in a car, that you'll probably have someone that has a little more like lighthearted, upbeat demeanor to them. So the voice of an audio describer really can impact the viewing experience as well. Do you have any thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, I think for the Baz Luhrmann thing, I thought that was funny because, yeah, Moulin Rouge is a movie I've tried to watch and turned off because it's so visual and so like in your face. And I should look into watching with audio description. I didn't think about that. Yeah, same with Romeo and Juliet. I'm like, oh my God. I almost feel like that'd be overwhelming, but I need to look into that now. But yeah, I think the voice is very telling. My friend Nicole, who I know, Izzy, one of the questions you emailed us was who would we like to interview on the podcast? My friend Nicole Zanzarelli, who does the audio description for The Mandalorian and a lot of the Star Wars stuff on Disney Plus. Her voice has a very like sci-fi sound to it. I don't even know how to describe it, but it just works with the sci-fi nature of Star Wars. And there are certain voices that like clearly go with other movies. With a movie with a lot of people of color, a lot of times you have a person of color being the narrator. So you want to be, have it kind of go along with the subject matter. Your narrator goes hand in hand with that.
Exactly.
Lee, did you have someone that you aspire to or hope we interview? I mean, if I were picking just someone who I would like to interview, would be Denis Villeneuve, but obviously that is the director of Dune, but that is like way out there. So I didn't know if there was someone for you, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, if there was someone actually would love to talk with Baz Luhrmann because I like him as a director, but also just talking about like, yeah, I don't know, it would just even be fun to talk about like accessibility in his films and how to, what he thinks about that and how he, just kind of the process of making a film of his accessible, because there's a lot of moving parts all the time. And any audio describer for his movies, my hat's off to them, because that's a very tall order.
Yeah, and for us, like, it's funny because if you listen to the end of TV shows or movies, they'll say written by and narrated by. Actually, I've heard less of written by lately, but they'll at least say narrated by. And so a lot of times you recognize the names. And so it's weird because sometimes we'll see them on our Facebook forum or whatever, and it'll be almost like a starstruck kind of thing. It'll be like, oh my gosh, this person described this. Like, I know them. We're also hoping to interview Liz Gottman at some point. You'll hear her name on a lot of the Netflix stuff.
I actually have a question regarding the voice actors. I think, well, I'm an animation major, and some folks often, like within my like field, are often having discussions about how they feel when popular like music artists or actors are voice acting for animated films. Does it throw you off when you recognize people's voice in other movies and other like media forms, and now they're voicing character within a new world that was built in the film?
I don't think for me, I almost feel like I like it. Like I know Nicole's voice so well now because I like it so much that I'll go into a movie and it'll start in 2 seconds and I'll be like, oh my God, this is Nicole. And I'll just like, and I'll almost, it'll heighten my enjoyment almost. Like I'll be looking forward to messaging her after and being like, hey, I really liked your, you know, or I'll really like try and find something in the description that I like to tell her. But yeah, I almost think it's cool to hear people from other things that I've watched describe something else. What do you think, Lee? That was your question, right?
I don't think it's just about describing, like of how currently they're using like actors to voice characters in animated film, like live action. Like if you take the most recent like combat issue was like with the Super Mario movie with Chris Pratt voicing Mario, and people saying like they just like essentially they just deposited his voice into this animated character that you recognize and you grew up with, and now he has a voice of Chris Pratt now in that situation. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris Pratt, I thought he did a pretty good job. I thought it sounded like Chris Pratt, but not too much like him. So like, I thought that was cool, but I don't know. I know there are voice actors and that's what they do. And they are great at that job, at like changing their voice a lot. But I do think it is cool to hear like Charlie Day and, you know, those iconic, I'm a big Charlie Day fan. So a lot of those iconic voices, hearing them in different animated movies are always fun.
I agree with that too. Like, I think that whether it's an audio describer that's familiar or just a, you know, celebrity actor that you know from, you know, live action work, I think that when you hear a voice that you recognize, there's a nice familiarity about it. It's like coming home to like a friend or a really like, you know, an acquaintance that you like, and it feels familiar, it feels comfortable, it feels recognizable, but then it's also fun to see the versatility that these actors can have once they go from live action to voice work. So yeah, I personally enjoy it as well because of the sense of familiarity, especially for you know, someone like me who is low vision and relies a lot more on sound. Recognizable voices are a really comforting thing to me.
Thank you.
Alex and I were curious. We know that you guys have been working on writing your own audio description scripts. And I'm curious to know, like, how has your process been? What are some of the challenges or just, you know, learning curves that you've experienced when you guys have been writing these scripts?
Another thing I'd like to mention about narrating or writing or the audio description process, it's always great when you can include someone who is low vision or blind in the process in some way. There's what's the saying? Nothing about us without us. So yeah, a lot of there's a big movement now to make blind people, low vision people involved in audio description. So I think anytime you can do that too, obviously for your projects, that might be very hard, but in professional projects, that's always very nice to see.
Absolutely.
I can go. Once again, it's Adriana. I was talking to Matt earlier before the session began. My independent project is a part of my thesis film. I'm creating an animated bilingual film between with a wolf and girl speaking in Spanish and English. So I am actually using like this opportunity to translate to format the dialogue first, the English and Spanish dialogue first, and now I am actually translating it to be used for the subtitle portion. And I think one of the interesting things I found so far is that in certain like cases in languages, like you use more words for one phrase, and you lose less of it. It's just right now it's a word choice thing that we're going over to make sure that the message is being maintained when it comes to subtitles.
Are you asking about reading the subtitles for?
So I am, yeah. So right now, like the format that I'm doing is, since it's more of a storybook, is almost like a storybook itself, where when the wolf is speaking, he says this line and is gonna be saying like banter the wolf or retorted the girl in a way. But I was wondering if you have any suggestions when it comes to like the timing, as well as like if you have any recommendations of maintaining that like visually. Like if I know some creative subtitles could also be distracting in some ways, and trying to time wise fit them during the scene as well.
So I think, at least for me, the timing of it doesn't matter too much, but I can't read really subtitles at all. So I think if it doesn't match with the words on screen, I think it's fine. But I think the big thing for me is you want make sure the voice for the wolf and the girl and the narration are different enough so that we know when the wolf is speaking, when the girl is speaking, when it's describing. Because you don't want it to be like, oh, he's speaking, but it's description instead. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Mhm.
What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, no, I second all of that. That the biggest thing for any time that there's like subtitles in a film, which first of all, Adrian, I applaud your project because it's very ambitious, and I think that's incredibly awesome that you're doing that, because it incorporates animation, it incorporates accessibility, in terms of like the subtitles and everything, as well as putting in audio description too.
I completely
I
agree.
think
Yeah, that's awesome.
so I wish you all the best with that, and I would love to see it when it's done. But yeah, the biggest thing about when you're describing subtitles is just making sure that there's distinguishment in the voice between identifying like which character is speaking, and that even if you're not able to get like someone for every voice to like read the subtitles or whatever, if the person that's doing the audio description, if it's you or someone else, like for the girl, higher pitch voice, for the wolf, lower pitch voice, something that just distinguishes the characters would be great.
Right, thanks.
I wrote a question. I don't know. This is Julia Huang speaking. And I wrote a question, but I think I'm just going to ask it now. First of all, I was born and raised in Taiwan and educated in the States. And also I'm an anthropologist. So I always think about things comparatively. So my question was, do you know which one is the best country sort of in terms of audio description or accessible cinema in the world, and what other languages sort of comparatively? I mean, so far we only know everything about America, about the United States, and also English language. So I was wondering if you could, if you ever come across this part comparatively, and you can suggest like, where to start thinking about it or looking for the resources. Thank you.
I'm not sure about other countries much. A lot of films are described in other countries that aren't described here that we don't have access to, unfortunately. But so I haven't heard any tracks from other countries other than America, but I would be very curious to know, especially in England, when they have other terms for other things, that it'd be interesting to hear like the description be like the tube, and then some people maybe in America be like, wait, what's that? It's like, oh, it's the subway. So I feel like that'd be kind of interesting. but I don't know like the quality of audio description. I can't speak for in other countries.
Yeah, I guess all I would say, because I don't have a lot of information on that either, but I know that like other countries are starting to also become more accessible with audio description. And the most common one that I've read about or seen is Spanish audio description. I don't know if that's just in like, Spanish speaking countries or if it's kind of shifted other places, but the most common one I've seen that's non-English is Spanish audio description, and what I've read about for other countries too.
And I know if you're interested, Roma on Netflix has Spanish audio description. So.
Thank you. And one suggestion, I think you can invite Matt to your podcast.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic idea.
I kind of figured this would be the guest spot for Matt, but I guess Matt's not really speaking in this. So yeah, we'd love to have Matt back.
His class is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I loved working with Matt. Honestly, like I couldn't imagine Matt yelling at anyone. I don't know if that's happened with you guys, but no, Matt is one of the nicest people.
It's a daily occurrence. I yell at them every week. Oh, this has been really fantastic. And since I know that we only have 4 minutes left, Lee and Alex, do you have any closing thoughts or advice for these students as they do engage in their audio description projects?
Please, like if you have any questions, even if you don't want us to read it on the show, but you just are wondering something, email us, just say in the email, this is a personal question, anything. If you want us to read it on the show, we can do that too. I know we didn't get to many of you, so please feel free to reach out. And the new episode, I think, would be very helpful for you guys because we released one today with my friend Jamie, and he is actually making description for his shorts. So he talks about writing description, and so it's very similar to what you guys are doing. So you might want to take a listen to that too.
My final thoughts would be, if as you guys are writing your audio description scripts and you guys want any kind of feedback, or there's any way that me or Alex can be a resource to you, or just be, kind of like someone to give you a little bit of feedback, feel free to reach out to us. You can email our podcast email. Matt has both of our personal contact info, and I give him permission to share that with any of you to be a resource. And if you have any other, and once again, just remember that this is all of these things about accessibility, it's a continual dialogue. The only way that we're going to learn from one another, because we have a lot to learn from you as well, is just keep the dialogue going. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. Please don't be afraid to have these conversations, and don't be shy about it, because we learn, we get educated by continually talking to people from all different walks of life, different backgrounds, and that's the most effective way of learning. So me and Alex are more than happy to learn with you, even beyond this class, and to keep dialogues and conversations flowing.
Yeah, it's never a burden. I think accessibility in film, I'm really glad Matt is teaching this class, because it's very much like the more people we can educate, the more, the more things will be accessible. So yes, any questions you guys have, it's never a burden or anything, please reach out.
And I commend you guys all for, just thank you guys for even caring enough about accessibility to take this class. That says a lot about who you guys are as creatives, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the way to move accessibility forward is to start at the education level. So this is great.
Wonderful. Well, Lee and Alex, I'm just going to give a big plug and shout out to your podcast. Believe it or not, there are other podcasts out there about audio description, but what I love about your podcast is that you also nerd out about movies. And so you weave in stuff about the craft of audio description, but it's as part of your general conversation about your love of movies. And so I really encourage everyone in this class to follow that podcast, listen to more than just the first episode. I'm continuing to really enjoy it. And believe it or not, I am now, through my company, All Senses Go, we are transcribing the episodes. So the transcripts for the dark room are now being provided by yours truly. So
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah.
We're so grateful.
I just wanted to let everyone know that, accessibility is very much a collaboration, and everyone's kind of helping each other out. And I'll just second what Alex and Lee said, which is it's wonderful that you all are taking this course and care enough about it to keep showing up. So thank you, Alex and Lee.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Can
thank
we
you
give-
guys for having us.
Yeah, can everyone
Thank
come
you.
off mute and do a quick
Thank you.
applause?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So
and
much.
Have fun with your next speaker and the rest of your course.
Definitely will. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you guys. Hope you guys had as much fun listening to this conversation as we had being a part of it. Once again, we thought this was such an enriching conversation and hope you guys were able to take away something from it as well.
Yeah, and if you have any further questions, anything to expand on, or anything that got triggered in your mind from listening to the class, if you want to email us, our email is darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com. And you can also follow us at Darkroom Filmcast on Instagram. And if you live anywhere in the DePaul area, or going to DePaul University, very much recommend Matt Lauterbach's class as well.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy. And once again, we were so privileged to be a part of this. And with that, we will sign off.
Yeah, we will see you guys in a couple weeks.
Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.